Alright, so you've all presumably seen the title of this video, so I'm going to cut all the usual theatrics and just get straight into it. Strike of the Serpentine, Ninjago's latest and unfortunately not so greatest comic, is a bit of a letdown in my opinion. I definitely don't think it's outright bad per se, and there's some really good stuff in there that I intend to highlight, so I don't want this to come across as super doom and gloom. That being said, I am going to start off with the positives because it's important that I keep the viewer attention and positive stuff does better. So to start off, I want to highlight the actual art and illustrations that are given to us through this comic. I don't usually touch on Ninjago's visuals, but in an age where AI slop is rampant and real artists are being shafted for the machine, I think it's important to highlight just how beautiful this comic is. There are multiple jaw-droppingly beautiful double-spread panels littered throughout the comic, and the regular panels are amazing too, with vibrant colouring and some absolutely gorgeous lighting, especially when the comic is giving us scenes at sundown/early evening. The art on display here is really fantastic, and I implore you to support this thing financially if you can, if nothing else but to show the people at LEGO that we want more stories and beautiful art like this. Moving on to the actual story though, the concept of this comic is a fantastic idea. Tournament of Elements gives us some really interesting insights into what the Serpentine War was through flashbacks, but it's pretty fast and loose with what the actual reasons behind it are. All we really get to see for this conflict is that the Serpentine and humans were at odds, Chen escalated the conflict into a war, and the Elemental Alliance clashed with the Anacondrae before said alliance fell apart because of Chen's manipulation. They then discovered that the flutes were the solution to beating the Serpentine and sealed them away in 5 tombs. What we got served the story of Season 4 pretty perfectly, but there was a ton of room for the external media team to eventually expand what went down in the shorts or a comic, and I think them choosing the latter was a really smart move. Ninjago's been doing more and more with its external media as of late, and I think that relegating this to that area of the Ninjago content scene was a really smart move, because it's always great when we get new comics, again if nothing else but for the art. Some of the stuff we see expanded upon is great too. The motivation behind the Serpentine War being tied back to the myth of a Golden Master was a really smart decision in my opinion, and I really like that Chen essentially orchestrated the war for his own gain of collecting Serpentine artifacts. The actual driving force of this comic taking place is really solid, and I really can't poke any holes in their logic. The Serpentine themselves are also pretty well characterized for the most part. Seeing Pythor again is always a treat, and I love how chaotic he is here. Alongside that, despite how little we get of them, I do think the Elemental Masters are fun enough characters. I do wish we got to see them get fleshed out a little bit more in this comic, especially when so much emphasis is placed on how their characteristics are reflected in the current generation of Elemental Masters, but they serve their purpose within the story well enough, and the tidbits of characterization we do get is some good stuff. That is unfortunately where my praise for the comic ends though, so I think it's time we get into the negatives and some of the smaller issues with this story. My main issues with what takes place in the comic honestly boil down to not really liking the directions taken with the expansions made to the Serpentine War story if I'm being honest. One of my main issues with this storyline is Garmadon's role in it, or rather his lack thereof. Season 4 presents us with a master-student dynamic between Chen and Garmadon, and unfortunately this comic opts to write Garmadon out for a significant chunk of its runtime to send him to the wilderness to learn Shatterspin instead of fleshing out his relationship with Chen during the Serpentine Wars. I would be totally fine with Garmadon going to the wilderness to learn Shatterspin, but he goes absolutely nowhere. This is definitely more so an issue with Shatterspin, although I've never got around to finishing that if I'm being honest. But even so, that comic has absolutely zero impact on the story of Strike of the Serpentine. Garmadon goes to the wilderness for a bit, learns nothing and comes back to fight in the war. His relationship with Misako doesn't get much development either, so his presence in the story kind of feels like a net zero inclusion. I get that they maybe didn't see him as the focus of the story, so fleshing him out maybe wasn't their top priority, but Season 4 presents him as such a major player in the Serpentine War, and the comic ends with a page telling us that Garmadon's going to return at some point, so he's treated as a key part of his conflict by everything but the main comic story, and it's such a shame to see him get shafted like this. I think the Alliance as a whole has some rather unfortunate storytelling surrounding it, because at least personally, I got the impression from Season 4 that the Alliance was formed when Wu and Garmadon started fighting side by side, you know, as sons of the first Ninjitsu Master, their brotherhood serving as the linchpin for the Alliance. Strike of the Serpentine, however, tells us that the Alliance was formed as a preemptive measure against a potential conflict against the Serpentine, without Garmadon's involvement, which isn't super law-breaking in and of itself, but I do think the Elemental Masters coming together under the most dire circumstances would have been far more interesting, and would have done a better job of mirroring Season 4's story, which focuses a ton on the Alliance fighting as one in their darkest hour. This certainly isn't a major thing, but I think it's something that they could have handled slightly better within the context of Strike of the Serpentine's story. Unfortunately, my next 2 points are going to be very negative, and this is the part of the video where I get into the real issues this comic has with its story. because it has some glaring issues with how it handles the Serpentine Wars. The first major issue I have is that Chen's role in the story feels really weirdly diminished and retroactively renders the stuff we're told in the Tournament of Elements moot. An immediate example that comes to mind is Pythor. While he's really fun to see again, I think he and Chen kind of step on each other's toes a bit, and I think everything Pythor does in the comic is something that Chen could have really benefited from doing himself. Pythor would have worked a lot better if he was the central Serpentine protagonist instead of Strike in my opinion. We know he's important and holds a heavy grudge against Chen, so it would have made perfect sense for him to be the one to fall victim to Chen's manipulation and unite the tribes. It's something we know he's perfectly capable of doing, so why not take this opportunity to flesh out his relationship with the tribes? You can also have him fulfill the role of talking with Wu at the beginning and end of a story, and I actually think it would have been a weirdly nice way to send him off after he got so little and crystallized. Him replacing Strike of the story would also fix an issue I'll bring up a little bit later on. As for Chen being diminished though, even his manipulation kind of falls flat in this story if I'm being completely honest. Tournament of Elements presents him as this cunning manipulator who knows how to turn elemental masters against each other. He did this during the Serpentine Wars, and he did it during his own tournament, but Strike of the Serpentine completely spits in the face of that and instead makes the Master of Earth betrayal be a result of Klaus's spell, which just sucks on so many levels. It turns this really impactful moment of betrayal from someone in the Alliance and instead boils it down to mind control done by Klaus, a baffling decision to make when the comic presents Benson as someone who wants to fight anyways and sees peace as boring. It would have been so easy to build off of that frustration within him and have Chen turn him against his allies with it. His mind control being done by Klaus and not by something like a Hypnobrai also kind of sucks in the sense that Chen always tells Klaus to hold off on using spells in the tournament and to let things play out naturally, which always ends up benefiting Chen in some way or the other in the end. It just feels so cheap to turn a scene highlighting Chen's wit as a manipulator into a case of Klaus using magic to his advantage. Really let down by this plot point. The second and final major criticism that I have with this comic is the resolution of the war with the Ancient Flutes. The war ending this way in Season 4 made perfect sense, and I think it's a great way to send the message that having powers isn't necessarily the best way to de-escalate a conflict, so what went wrong with the ending here? Well, to keep it blunt, they changed how the flutes worked for the worse, and now instead of the flutes being simple snake charmers, they have a magical ability to do a soul read on the Serpentine and only works on the evil ones for some reason? So Strike is essentially labelled as one of the good ones by the comic, which sucks so much. Ninjago content post-season 1 does so much to humanize the Serpentine and to people who live their lives like normal humans do, and I think that this unfortunately undoes a lot of that work put into the Ninjago team to make the Serpentine not just simple warmongers. It's such a shame to see them take this direction with its ending, because what they were working with was such a slam dunk. All in all, Strike of the Serpentine is a bit of a mixed bag, and while I think it has some glaring issues, I did enjoy my time with this thing fine enough. I do hope that whatever comes next from Ninjago's very talented comic team doesn't fall into the same pitfalls as this comic, and we can get some really cool external media in the future, because I do want to see this team succeed and make good stuff. That is all I have to say about this comic though, so I want to thank all of you for watching this video for this long, and if you do want to read something Ninjago related that I do really enjoy, you should check out Brutality, baby. Yeah, it's time for the obligatory marketing. It's a Ninjago fanfiction written by a good friend of mine, and while it isn't for younger audience, I think if you're a little bit more mature and want to give it a read, I'd absolutely recommend giving it a look. A link to the Google Doc and the Discord are in the description of this video, and there is a link to the Discord on screen now. If you want a more general server for discussing Ninjago, you can join my Discord server, the Digiverse. Links to that will be in all the same places. With that said though, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye for now. You know, the Sacred Flute only working on Evil Serpentine is really convenient now that Frack's on the team. I heard he was caught following hot Imperium Claw girls on Chirp, so if he steps out of line, this is a really good solution.